Aqua shared, with me about the idea of if I had any presentations or PowerPoints or whatever like that. I said, it's a dugout. You don't have, presentations in a dugout. There's no such thing as Wi-Fi in a dugout. Or PowerPoint presentation in a dugout. We just talk, and strategize, even spit. That's what they do in the dugout, and no, I know, Erica, we're not. But at least we'll spit out some stuff, and right, exactly, and go from there. But I was charged to talk to us and just lead the discussion about leading towards race equity, and I think the way in which we could start this conversation off, and that's what I like to have this as a conversation, is the way to share what is race equity, and by definition is just simply is the intention of identifying race identity in a person where their skin color doesn't matter in terms of how they fare out in society. So it doesn't matter if I'm a black man or you're a white man, or you're a white woman and get a bank, go to the bank, and get a bank account, or to attain an educational degree, or to access whatever it is that we need within our community, and we can go and do it and access it because we have leverage. And so that's part of this is what is part of the discussion that we are discussing in terms of how do we achieve race equity, and how do we achieve to build a culture towards race equity. I want to say to you, I think that one of the ways in which we do it is to look at power, is to look at and look at organizations like RMAPI, who's been charged to really help build towards creating this leverage for members in our community with power. But power is not the lack of money. Power is really the lack of power. Poverty is the lack of power, and just said the opposite. And what we have to deal with is how do we understand the idea of poverty, not as a lack of money, but poverty as the lack of power, and help to redistribute the power among those who live within said community. And one of the things of doing that, I want to propose, is looking at the idea of the difference between a community service organization versus a community development organization. And look at that. And look at that in terms of how we will create that process where one can create that fairness and create a way to dismantle structural conditions and structural racism. Because when we look at structural racism, we look at structural racism by way of the community's condition. That's what structural racism is. It's the community's condition. And where the community is at is where we have to begin to figure out ways and means on how we're going to help those conditions, but it has to be in a relationship. It has to be in a relationship, that we can't just come into a community and say, we got the answer, and we just want to come in because we got the resources, and therefore we just do what we do. But the idea is to work in partnership with those that live in the community to begin to build not just houses or to build credit unions or whatever, but building power within. Come on in. Welcome. Building power. And so I want to challenge your assumption that the idea of community service is not the way to go when we're dealing with building a race equity culture, because community service is always about the idea of temporary relief. It's always about temporary relief. It's never sustainable. But community development is sustainable because you're strengthening capacity. That's the idea, and you are dismantling structural conditions.
That's what I like about this new unity agenda, and also the upward mobility
Yes.
kind of narrative. it just resonates with me because it just goes to a whole another level, multiple levels of addressing poverty and outcomes for communities, for underprivileged
Absolutely.
communities.
Right, in a sustainable way. Right, Joe. So the idea of the community development organization module is the actual methodology on how we dismantle structural racism. It is the way in which we look at that whole idea, what you just mentioned about the idea of unity and looking at that and connect that with the unity. I'm just visioning it with unity, the unity agenda with the theory of change. But I also see that not just as a theory of change, but also see that as a way of a theory of connection. That the community developer is actually a community connector, and that we're building connections between people who live in that said community to fairly in terms of where they live at, and fare out fairly in the process, so that they can grow and reap the benefit and live in prosperity and live with freedom of prosperity and can access the different services and have all of the things that the people in Garson Avenue and Culver Road may have versus the people in Pittsburgh on Main Street. And that we all can live happy ever after again. And so the process of that is the idea to understand that there's a difference. So the difference with the community service factor versus the community development, in the community development, like I shared, is the idea of building something that's sustainable because we're building and we're strengthening capacity. And that's what we need to do. If RMAPI is to become, and is growing into that. I always say if RMAPI is to become the leading factor we need, and certainly that's where RMAPI is going, then the key for RMAPI has to be to shift mindset. And that we have to look at this not from, I got this water bottle, but I wasn't drinking from it. Tell me, what do you see in this water bottle? Water. But what about the water? It's half what?
Half full.
I was hoping you went the other way. I was hoping you went the other way. He knew exactly. He knew exactly. I said, darn it, Larry. I was hoping you would say half empty, because we always see it from a deficit model. Whenever we're dealing with community service based, it's always from a deficit model, and it's not from a more asset-based model. And so the idea of community or development should always see it from a model that is already half full, and we work from there, and we grow from there, and we take what's already in the community, and we just continue to connect and grow and build and keep going, as I would say, yonder, and make the difference in that regard. And so that's the power of what I look at and seeing in terms of achieving a race equity culture, is to achieve that in a way of building equity, but by way of building what's already in the community, what's already there. Because whether we know it or not, there are community leaders that lives in that community. They may not know the people at City Hall, they may not know the people at the Capitol, they may not know the influencers, but they know that block, right? They know that community. They know Beechwood. They know Emma. They know those communities. They know Morning Heights. They know that stuff, right? And not just that they know their community, they know the traditions. They know the symbol. And many of them have dreams about what their community look like. They have visions about what their community look like. And so as a result of that, they need to be sitting with us, because if anything, they might not have the resources that the players in this room may have, but they got one thing that we don't have. They have the dream. They have the vision. They know the symbols of that community that we might not know, whereby they have to sit at the table, and that we create a hospitable table. A table that's so hospitable, that's so inviting, so welcoming, that creates this idea of what I call the hospital table. Because if anything we do outside of that, and if we're not creating that table, then I think what it is it's called toxic charity. It's charity that whereby we're doing the do-gooder effect, just for me to feel good that I've done something for somebody else. But it does nothing because, like you said, Joe, that it only, 24, 40 hours, my stomach's going to get hungry again, and then I got to go back and find me some more food to eat. But we've done nothing to change the condition. We've done nothing to change the ancillary effects of why people are hungry. And what do we do to get us out of the business of passing out food and or clothes or whatever the situation is. Outside of that, it's toxic charity. There's a book called Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton. It's a great, great book. I just fell in love with that book. I read it about 4 times. I can memorize that book. Jamie, I can read that book all day. It's like the Bible. And so
We'll try to help people look up and balance a checkbook, but there's nothing to balance.
Exactly.
And that's the way people balance.
Yeah.
Financial literacy
Yeah.
classes,
Yeah.
and there's nothing.
Right. So instead of us doing for them, the key is that we do it with them to empower them. And that's the key. And so building a race equity culture is the idea of empowerment. Because if we're empowering people, we walk together, we in fact change the condition of the community, which means we change certain policies, we change the housing conditions, we change the banking conditions, but we're doing it together as a community because we're doing it to empower people and therefore have a sense of ownership, have a sense of connection. That theory of change connects to me as a theory of connection. And so RMAPI is that conduit to create connection between the organization and the people and give voice to the people. Give power to the people and invite them at the table and make the table, or in this case, the circle, a hospitable table, a hospitable circle, and welcome them in. Any questions? I feel like preaching, but I'm not going to preach because,
I had a thought.
Yeah, Larry.
Because I know when we try to empower people, so many people that are in poverty or near poverty have had power used against them. So they don't even, you have to get them first to the point to know that they can be empowered, that power is not a bad thing. So just can you talk about just, for somebody that, when you talk about power, oftentimes people just have a negative connotation of that because it's never been something they've seen in a positive manner.
Absolutely. But it's influence. So when we deal with the idea of power, we're really talking about the idea of influence. And so there are people in our community who feel that they have nothing and doing nothing, but because they don't have that level of influence, where many of them probably still going to the corner check cashing place where they don't have a checking account. And so they have to cash their checks, at a check cashing place. And so what we're trying to do to do those little things in terms of changing mindset. So like I said, poverty is not just the absence of money, but poverty is the absence of power or influence, and moving someone to go forward in their life and access these various different services for their prosperity and their growth.
Of being able to be planful about their own lives.
Yes.
Right, and making their own choices.
Yep.
Picking their own doctors or shopping, being selective in terms of where they want to shop, where they want to send their kids to school, or those kinds of things too. It's individual power as well.
And that's
the personal power.
And Madison said it, that's the power of autonomy, because that's exactly what it is. They have that sense of independence, that we need to empower them. But that's the reason why the idea of using a community development model is the best approach rather than a community service model, because community service, you're only really there for temporary purposes, to satisfy temporary situation, a relief. And once that relief is done, we go on to the next issue, because it's never about the community. Most of the time, it's about the individual. It's about the individual to pass out the good. I feel good today that I did something for somebody else. But
I totally agree, and it's one of my favorite books too, Toxic Charity. There's several issues, and I do like the sequencing of these talks. So listening to Dr. Aycock talk about trauma,
yes,
and how pervasive it is, and there are human needs that will exist. So community service organizations, governmental organizations are there for a purpose. Structurally, unless you are at the livable wage of $65,000 a year for a family of four, you will need to have some sort of support, public
Absolutely.
or private. And charity is unfortunately filling in where public has failed, right? So it's all of that together. So I often struggle with this tension of, is it community service and the toxicity part of it, but it's really filling a need because there's a system failure. So it's a both and. So how do we ameliorate the pain while doing the systems change? And you kind of got to
That's
do
so
a
deep.
weaning of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Because again, as I think about, and I can't help but think of the domestic violence survivors that would come to Willow when I was there, and they needed a place to go. And how do you solve for the structural reasons of why they were fleeing in the first place, which was intergenerational, which was taught, which was all the things, all the stressors. And yet you also have to solve that within the larger, bigger picture. So I just appreciate that I ended up in this talk with you following Dr. Aycock around the trauma pervasiveness, including the trauma
Yep.
of racism.
Yep.
And how do we then move? But it's not a one or the other, it's both.
It's both and. It's both and. And I think, again, to answer your question, Jamie, is and challenge my thought on this, because I think it has to be by way of creating a hospitable place and space to invite people who are missing from the table. So I think that's the first start, that the leaders who can identify this have to be the ones who's charged to identify at least some of the leading indicators and issues, and then invite the others to come and sit at the table. Like, for instance, if we're dealing with black and brown people in our community, one of the grouping of peoples that are missing could be the church, the black clergy, as an example. You know, just an example, right? So then inviting them to come to the table, that might begin that conversation and build that conversation out in creating strategies. You know, because but it only takes just a few people to kind of start the fire. I say we have to become the fire starters. And I think one of the concerns is ain't nobody want to start a fire. Let's start a fire. Okay, huh?
I want to start a fire.
Amen. Amen. I know that. And so we need fire starters who are willing to say, this is a problem. And we may not have the answer, but we are calling in the troop and to come on in and sit down, and then let's begin to have the conversation. But we need you at the table. We need you, because then that in of itself, yes, thank you, Rebecca. Oh, that's the danger of having a black preacher to talk. And so it's because of the idea, you know, I think I lost my train of thought. Oh, but the fire starters. We thank you. We need those fire starters, and those who are excited. But guess what? This work is going to take a while. This is not going to be where it's just going to happen in a year or two. This thing is at least one generation. We have to be prepared to stay into this game at least one generation. Because this work is hard. Lady said it, 15 years. That's just one generation alone. You probably got 2 or 3 more to go. But that's the step. But somebody's got to start. Yes, sir.
So, question. So some of the work that Theo and I are doing together around kind of community empowerment and community voice, right? So what the leaders are saying is that we have agency, power, assets, and we have strengths to what you alluded
Yep.
to, going in the community. When we come to the tables, the process has to be fixed first. And so that looks like power. So when we come to the table, there has to be co-equal governance. There has to be power where the system is following the community's agenda. And then there has to be accountability on the tail end, because money gets allocated to programs that the community keeps saying don't work. So where's the community's role in evaluating the impact of the way money is spent to impact their lives, right? So it's like they want the process fixed first. They don't want to come to the table the way they are now. And so the confidence and the trust is broken. So how do we sit down with them and design the new table then say, now let's all come to this new table. I think that would be a dramatic shift, not us trying to create something that is enticing enough for them to come to when they know what they want to come to.
Absolutely. It has to start from them. So I think the creativity has to start from the community and their wants and their need and start from there. And you bring in the resources, but it starts from them. Because then that's how we build the trust.
So how do we do that? How do we follow them?
That's a good question.
You have to break down the table first. They're not gonna adjust it to where they want. You have to start fresh. It's a brand new table that they help build. Because if there's already a table people are sitting at, they're not gonna be like, all right, let's change 90% of the bylaws and then we'll all go forward. Like that just won't happen that way. It should, but it won't. So I think you just need a totally new, fresh table, and then the resource set behind that table instead, and then it's built.
So why wouldn't it happen at RMAPI? You know, why wouldn't we change the bylaws?
I'm being pessimistic. That should be the change we're doing then.
Yeah. I mean, who else is going to change it?
But us,
Yeah,
about you. Yeah.
right.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what does the hospitable table look like? You know, right? We got to get that. You know, that was that exchange gave an answer. But I'm curious if you have, Marlowe, any other thoughts?
Yep.
Right? If
Yep.
RMAPI should, I think I heard this. RMAPI should create the hospitable table
right.
to move our work forward, right? So what does that look like for us?
First of all, it's your inclusive table. So it is the table that you are bringing and inviting others to sit and to brainstorm with you, that you don't come in with an agenda. That agenda has to be fostered and led by the community. You might have resources, but they don't need to know that right now. What they need to know is that they can trust you. They can trust me. And the way of doing that is it's going to take a while to there's all kinds of ways to do it. Knock on doors, I don't know. But there's some kind of way that has to begin to say, can we at least just talk? Can we at least just have a conversation without any promises about anything else? But I think in terms of building that table of inclusion and the process of hospitality is to start with an earnest plead about, can we talk? Without anything else. Because like you said, I think Larry said it, or somebody said it, that, oh no, you said it, Steve, is that what we've done in the past doesn't work. So we have to figure out, how do we go back at it again? This work is daunting.
I'm really stuck on, when you're talking about the fire starters and who's
Yeah.
going to start that fire. And I think working with the single moms cohort at RMAPI, they are such empowered, amazing, incredible women that I can see every single one of them being ready right now to start a fire. So I think pulling community members that truly are living that experience every single day, they know the answers, and creating this table for them to feel comfortable and accepted and understood, I think is so key, because these folks have been dealing with so much for years and years and years and years. So they certainly have found ways to make it work. They certainly are going to continue to do so.
Right.
And I think they need to be involved every single step of the way. Every single step. I'm really hung up on that.
Yep. And I guess, okay, I got it. Well, thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You got 5 minutes before your next one.
Jamie, got you?
Oh, I know.
Early on, I'm like, I want to hear.
Do you do the